something that a lot of people miss when they first start to develop a training exercise. They miss the idea that you need to have a cycle, like a cycle of, build, peak, taper, recovery, for lack of a better description. And so they just go out and they start at the peak performance that they would think that they could do. They run or they lift till they burn out, and then they try to do that every day, and ultimately they fail because they're not following a cycle, a good cycle. That's why seasons are so important for us. And that same sort of cycle exists within flow. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to Flow Over Fear, and today it is snowing. It is snowing for the first time this year, and it is October 29th as I record this. I'm probably releasing this sometime in November, but as I record this right now in the end of October, it is snowing for the first time. And as you could tell, I still get pretty excited about that. I'm a Southern California native, and I'm living in Colorado now, so the idea of snow isn't weird to me living in Colorado. But as a Southern California native, I never saw snow growing up that much. So seeing snow, I still get that sense, especially the first snow of the season. I still get that sense of just magic, of joy, of like that boyhood giddiness that you get when you see something new, and the snow happens. You start making snowballs and you start just making snow angels. My neighbors who are native Coloradans think I'm an idiot because they're all shoveling their driveways and pissed off about the early snow, and I'm just out there just acting like a dork, making snow angels. But it's still a fun time of year for me, and not necessarily so much for my furry pets, my dogs. And if you have dogs, you probably know this. And if you live in areas where the seasons change, you probably know this. But during the summertime, when you wake up early in the morning, or I should say, when your dogs wake you up, because that is always what happens in the morning. Dogs are not great for people who are not morning people. But when your dogs wake you up, they are super pumped. They're super excited. They jump up and they want to get outside. This is during the summertime because they want to get outside. They want to do their business. They want to smell the air. They want to do everything. And it's great for them all year long, all summer long. And then, all fall long, they're just excited and they're thrilled. They're jumping through all the leaves that are falling during the autumn. And then that first snowfall hits. And the second that first snowfall hits, they wake up early in the morning. They're super excited. They want to get outside, and they hit that glass screen door and they look outside at the snow and they just look up at you and they say, "Nope, I'm not going out there. Can I just go do my business in your shoe again like I did yesterday? Or maybe I can pee next to that vent and everybody could smell it. They'll all know it's me. It'll be great." And that's kind of how they feel for the entire winter. It's impossible, or it's very, very difficult to get them to go outside and do their business in the winter. But I love the seasons changing. I just love seeing seasons change. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that's relevant to our conversation today in terms of seasons changing. And today I want to talk about the topic of flow. And how that relates is, I think for us, we always want to be in a state of flow when we start to do an activity, right? I mean, like when you get up and you start getting to work, or you go outside and you want to exercise, you want to go for a run or a bike ride or something like that, or you have to immerse yourself in an activity. I think by our very nature, we want to put ourselves in the zone when we do those things so that we can perform at our best all the time. And who doesn't? But I think that the problem is that one of the questions that we want to ask ourselves in that is, can you be in a constant state of flow? And that's the question I want to pose to you today. And if you have an opinion on that, I'd love to hear what your opinion is and what your thoughts are. My personal opinion that I want to share and I want to talk about, and I think that the science backs this, is that no, you cannot be in a constant state of flow. It would be amazing if you could. And if we all could be in an amazing state of flow, well, we wouldn't have a lot of resistance or anything like that in order to continue to excel and grow. But I want to talk a little bit about today on why I feel that you can't be, and not just that, but I'm not just going to shut the door on flow and say, no, you can't be on a constant state of flow, so you might as well give up, go home, forget about it. No, I think that when you can get into flow, you can learn to recognize it, and you can learn to optimize it and get more from yourself in those states. And as you acknowledge when you're getting into those states, you can put yourself into that state more frequently, more often, and be able to, perform better over time. It actually works out well to our advantage. And one of the reasons this question came up for me is because I've been, over the course of the last couple of years or so, as I started this show, and as I've really looked at flow in my own life, my reticular activating system has really seen the word flow a lot. And just like many other people out there, I think we see it, and we're starting to get a little jaded by it. We're starting to see flow in a variety of sources. It's just being brought up for everything. Getting in the flow for yoga, or flow, getting in the flow at work. Oh, I'm in the flow with exercise. I'm flow. It's everywhere. And it's used so much that it's almost devoid of meaning at this point. But I think that people grasp onto words like that, like flow or other words like that because they are something that we want to aspire to. And yeah, we get tired of things that we hear a lot that just get repeated way too often. And a lot of times they do lose their meaning. So I want to give the meaning that I believe that flow represents, and at least it represents for me. And this is a definition that was presented by somebody I follow who is an expert in flow, named Steven Kotler. He wrote the book The Art of Impossible, and I believe the book's called Finding Superman. There's a number of books that he wrote. In Our Country is a new one that he's written, and they're all books about high performance and specifically flow. And he's now the executive director of the Flow Research Collective, where they talk about and they research, you guessed it, flow. And so there's a lot of science on this subject. And Steven Kotler's definition of flow from his research is that it's an elevated state of consciousness, where we are performing at our best and we feel our best. And you just think about that elevated state of consciousness part. I mean, can you relate to that? Does that happen all the time? No. It's something that happens from time to time where we just feel good. We feel this almost out of body experience of just, we're just being carried with whatever this body or whatever this mind is doing for us right now. And it feels good. It feels good, and and we're performing well. So that's the feeling. That's the state that we want to get into. So that definition is important, because we just don't want to just throw around the word flow like, everyone is right now and just say, oh, we're getting flow. We're flow. No, that's really a great definition for it. Elevated state of consciousness, performing at our best, where we feel our best. And so I've struggled with the idea of flow, through all that. But I think that this idea that we always want to be feeling good and not really being able to achieve that, or always wanting to feel that flow and not always being able to achieve that, sets us up for failure. Because even if we're flowing, even if we are in the flow 50% of the time, which is a lot, by the way, we're not going to be in flow 50% of the time. But if we feel like we need to be in it all the time, we're going to think we failed, even if we're out, quote unquote, flowing everyone else in the world. Because we just can't reach that perfection metric. So what is the realistic expectation? And I think that if you can be intentional about understanding the cycle of flow, then you can start to actually recognize when you can be in it and optimize for it. And, create scenarios where knowing when you can put yourself into flow based on this cycle, that you can, perform better in your life and get into flow more often than you regularly would. The important part is that you understand the flow cycle, which is another cycle that was developed by Steven Kotler. And if you want to read about this, Steven Kotler's book, The Art of Impossible, is one of my favorite books because it really talks about how the top 1% of performers in the world in any kind of discipline achieve their results. And they pursue that impossible. You have Olympians, you have successful business people, you have adventurers who go out and do these incredible things, and they achieve flow so often. They achieve that 1%. Steven Kotler breaks it down in this book marvelously. And one of those segments is called the cycle of flow, or he talks about the flow cycle, and there are 4 stages to that cycle. Those are the stages I want to talk about today. And just like there are, kind of tying it back to my introduction about the seasons, just like there are 4 seasons we exist in, winter, spring, summer, and fall. We have 4 stages of flow. And this is true of a lot of the things that we want to do to pursue something. You have a cycle. When I was competing in triathlon, there was a macro cycle and a micro cycle. During the macro cycle, that was the broader schedule or the broader cycle that you would build over the course of a triathlon season. Say you had 12 weeks to your next race. That 12 weeks was going to be your macro cycle. So the first few weeks were going to be your build phase. And then you would have, and that's where you would build the endurance. That's where you build the volume to start to be able to accommodate the higher volume training. And then you would have that greater build phase, or that peak phase, right? Where you would peak at the time at the most volume and the most intensity that you wanted to get into. That was like your peak phase. And then you would taper off. And that was the taper that you would do. You would back off the volume so that you could build the energy, build the reserves of energy in order to unleash it during the race. Then you would race. And then, of course, you would have that recovery phase, the recovery phase where you essentially recovered from all of that activity. Now, that's something that a lot of people miss when they first start to develop a training exercise. They miss the idea that you need to have a cycle, like a cycle of build, peak, taper, recovery, for lack of a better description. And so they just go out and they start at the peak performance that they would think that they could do. They run or they lift till they burn out, and then they try to do that every day, and ultimately they fail because they're not following a cycle, a good cycle. That's why seasons are so important for us. And that same sort of cycle exists within flow. And the first stage of and the 4 stages, as Steven Kotler describes them, are struggle, relaxation, flow, and recovery. And I'll describe each of these. Now, that first phase of flow, struggle, that's an interesting one because we hear that and it's almost counterintuitive because, well, wait a second. I want to avoid struggle. The whole reason I want to get into flow is because I don't want to struggle. I want to feel good. I want to perform at my best all the time. Why should I be struggling? But it's an important one. The struggle is one of the most important steps of that because it's those initial steps. And the initial steps of anything are almost always painful. Whether we look at the birth process, the process of being born is a painful process. Starting hurts. And we can minimize that pain in a variety of ways, but we can't avoid the struggle. That struggle is important. You have to struggle. And this is an important concept to remember. And this one I want you to tattoo on your foreheads if you have to. You have to struggle in order to get into flow. You have to. Think about performing at your best. If you want to improve on anything, you have to, if you want to get stronger by lifting weights, you have to have resistance, right? That's what builds the strength, or that's what helps break down the muscles, right? So you have to struggle. And what does that struggle really look like? Well, when you think about a big goal that you have, for example, or a big project you have at work, or you have a fitness goal that you want to achieve, right? And you haven't done much of the work yet. And so when you first look at that goal, like if it's a big goal, like if it's a big project or something like that, the entirety of the project looks overwhelming. It looks uncertain. You're uncertain about how it's going to unfold. It's overwhelming because it's just a lot. And, a lot of times you might doubt yourself. And there's a struggle in that first part of where to start, of how to start, of putting that first step in one step in front of the other and gaining that momentum. It's almost like you are, you're starting to gear up when you're building the RPMs to get your car to drive. And so that struggle is going to happen at the beginning. You have to just really embrace the struggle. You have to be okay with it. And you have to really move through it. You have to move through that discomfort in order to grow. Remember the idea of that fear or that discomfort that you feel being an opportunity? Like fear is uncomfortable, right? It tells you that you're pushing up against the edge of your comfort zone. And that's really where we're at when we're struggling, is we're at the edge of our comfort zone. So we have to struggle in order to move beyond that threshold of our comfort zone. And so then the next phase is we relax. So after we've struggled for some amount of time on that process, and it may be like if we're trying to get into daily flow, say, this could be that we're trying to get into flow over the course while we're working on a project during the day. And we just get started to work in the morning and we're trying to get into the groove of things. We're trying to get into the momentum and it's a struggle to get started. Well, after about, that first 20 minutes or so of struggle, you could take a step back and you can relax. And this is where you're taking yourself out of the struggle and you're maybe moving your body a little bit. Maybe you're going for a walk or a light jog or something like that. And you're taking yourself away from any of the activities related to that work or anything like that. And you do that relax, you take that relax or you do that walk for maybe 20 minutes. And over that time, that kind of just resets and, regrounds you into this state where you can come back. And then you can get into that flow state. It's not until the third phase of this cycle that you actually get into flow. So see how you cannot start in flow? You have to kind of get into it. So after the struggle, after you take yourself out and you just take a break, you walk away from it for about 20 minutes. Then you come back into it and you start to focus on the one thing. You build back the momentum so that you get into that flow. And then that flow lasts for a period of time. So you actually can do the work as long as you're focused. And some of the important concepts of being in that flow state are that you remove the distractions from yourself. You got to keep your cell phone away from you, right? You got to put that somewhere else so that you're not looking at other screens other than what you're doing. Or you take yourself, or you try to remove yourself from an environment where distractions will exist. That way you can focus intently on that thing that you're trying to focus on, regardless of if it's a work project, an entrepreneurial project, or a fitness project, whatever it may be. That's kind of how you do it, because you can do those first three steps, by the way, within the physical realm as well. Think of your Steven Kotler has used that idea of skiing, right? You want to you're going to have that struggle at the beginning of trying to pick up a new skill or trying to pick up some new things. But then if you kind of take a break, you take a step away from it for a bit, and then you go back into it, that's where you could find the flow state. Then the time frames, by the way, that I'm using are not set in stone. And this is kind of where the art of flow comes into play, because it really depends on the nature of the activity that you're doing. If you're doing an activity that is fitness related, it may be different from an activity that you're doing that may be music related. I've played music in my life, and it's kind of the same thing. It's very similar in the sense that you start by warming up and it just doesn't feel good. It's a struggle to get started when you're playing a musical piece. Like I play the cello. That's why I'm doing the cello pieces. So when you're starting to play, your fingers are cold. It's just not coming. But if you do that warm up and then you just take a break, you take yourself out of it, you walk away from it, you don't listen to anything, you don't look at anything, you just step away from it, you come back into it, then you can focus on a specific segment of that piece and then start playing and get into that flow. Does it happen all the time? Not necessarily. But doing that more often, more frequently puts you in that feeling of being in the zone. And this is a game of frequency, right? It's a game of not always. We always want to we want to avoid. I almost did it there, by the way. You want to avoid using absolutes. You don't want to say always. Like, you can't say I will always want to be in flow, because you're setting yourself up for failure. But if you can put it in there more frequently on the aggregate over hundreds or thousands of sessions, you'll find that flow that you've been getting into, it's not a linear pattern of growth. It's this sinusoidal kind of pattern. How's that for a big word? Yeah. So you have these peaks and valleys, and they're constantly going upward. And that's the best way to make continuous progress. This is really one of the keys to a daily flow practice of how we can learn to master anything. And really, I mean, this is not in any way to be kind of arrogant, but I've been told in the past, or asked in the past, how do you figure out, how do you do so many things? How is it that you could fit in, mastering music, being a great musician? How is it that you can, be an amazing athlete who's qualified for a world championship? How can you be doing this podcast and running a 9-figure business? How do you do that? Well, the truth is because I've set up the patterns in my life to build the discipline. And that discipline comes from knowing that science of flow and trying to incorporate the art of it in my life. The science of flow is that more broader aspect of this is the cycle. And the art of it is knowing when to incorporate it, when to back off, and when. And that's done through practice. You have to practice, and you have to fail at first to get that up there. But the more that you can do that, the more things, the more activities you can begin to master and enjoy. And so that final piece, that final cycle of the flow, cycle, is recovery. And so after we get into that flow state, we have to recover. We have to rest. And if I were to ask you, what is the longest section of that cycle? Well, you probably know it now because I already kind of gave you the answer, but the longest part of the flow cycle is likely the recovery part. And the reason is because we have to sleep. We have to have more of an active recovery. Sleep is not the end all be all of recovery. We have to take ourselves out of it. That flow section, what I've found in my life is that the parts of flow that flow part of the cycle really can last at a maximum for an hour or two. Like you can stay in that zone for an hour or two. And that's why I recommend that when people are working, that if they're working on a specific project, that they block out like 2 hours for it, so that they can get through that initial struggle part. They can step away from it, and then they can get into it and work in it for about an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And then when what the kind of key metric you want to look at to kind of back out of that flow, or to back out of that project, is at some point in time, you're going to get tired, or you're going to get exhausted. You're going to lose that momentum. And what happens at that point is you fall off a cliff It's not like it's a gradual fall. It's like you're plateauing, you're peaking, you're flowing, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're crashing. And when you crash, that's a sign that you're too late. I mean, the recovery is going to be longer in that case. So one of the key elements that I like here when I think about recovery, when I think about going into the recovery phase, I like to say start to rest when you're at your best. Meaning that when you're peaking, when you're in the zone, when you're in the flow, do that for a while. But set a timeline so that when you're still feeling in that flow, cut it off, put it down, and rest. And I guarantee that the next day, or or whenever you go back to it, if you go back to it on a disciplined pattern, the next time you go back to it, you'll be able to pick it up, get into that struggle again, take a step back, but then get right back into it. And so once you know this cycle of struggle, relaxation, flow, then recovery, you can start to understand the phases you're on, begin to control yourself into those phases a little bit more. And then you'll begin to experience flow a little bit more instead of constantly fighting against it. Instead of constantly fighting the battle of trying to fight to get into flow. Fighting and flow are inherently opposites. You can't be just fighting and trying to push and say that you're in flow. Those are kind of inherently opposite things because you're not rising above yourself at that point. You're in the midst of the fighting. So the point is, when you're in the struggle, that first part, that struggle, that's not flow, you're struggling. Then you relax, you let go, walk away, and you come back to it. You get into it and you flow in with focus. And then that recovery phase, when you're at your best, that's when you start to rest. And then you recover. And that recovery piece is usually the longest part of it because that's where a lot of the adaptations occur. A lot of the adaptations for any growth that we're going to have, they come when we're resting, not looking at our cell phones, not looking at screens, not doing something else, not watching TV, truly resting. Sleep is important on that recovery piece too. And if you can do this, if you can start to understand that flow cycle, just like the seasons that we exist in, you can start to better use it to your advantage, and you can stop fighting against fighting to stay in flow, and you'll be in it more often, and you'll begin to realize the pattern, and you'll spend more time in flow. So I hope that resonates with you, and I hope you can realize, I hope you can take from this that we can't necessarily always be in a flow state, and just the idea of flow is not a terrible thing, even though it's overused concept and all this kind of stuff. But we can learn to understand the cycle of flow better, thanks to researchers like Steven Kotler and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and others like them. And they can help us to experience that flow more often in our lives and perform at our best and reach our true potential. So I hope that you're able to reach your true potential and find flow more often. And I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts on this episode. And if you like this episode and you think someone can benefit, please share it with someone that you know. I appreciate you. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.